Hello, good day. My name is Richard Byron Cox and welcome to the first substantive lecture as regards this course on the National Focal Point. Today, we want to look at the first module, and that module will deal with the UNCCD in general. Now, this UNCCD is a process. It is an internationally, legally binding process, meaning that there is an agreement, a convention, and countries have signed on to it and they have determined that they will work in accordance with this agreement. But why do they have this agreement? What is this process all about? What does it contain? Who is involved? Why should we be doing this? These are the questions that we need to answer. Well, everything has a history, and so does the UNCCD. The UNCCD actually began, if you were to trace it back properly, one would have to say in the 1970s, when there was a serious drought in the Sahel in Africa, and people died, animals died, the earth stopped producing, and people realized we had to deal with this. So the United Nations called a conference, which was held in Nairobi, Kenya in 1977, and they came up with the United Nations plan to combat desertification. And so they were working with this plan. But the truth is that it wasn't very, very effective. And so something else had to be done. As you may know, in 1992, there was the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. It is sometimes called UNCCD, or it is sometimes called the Rio Conference. But it happened in 1992. And at that time, all the countries of the world came together and decided that we had to move to something called sustainable development, so that we would have a sort of development which would guarantee today's life, but future generations as well. And they had two major conventions already written. Basically, this was the Climate Change Convention, and there's a second convention called the Biodiversity Convention. But at that meeting, a lot of people realized that desertification was a serious problem across the globe. It was a global problem. And so the idea came that you should have a third convention, and that is when the idea came to set up the UNCCD, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. The long and short of the story is that it was agreed that the international intergovernmental working group would be set up to work out this convention. And 2 years later, 1994, they had opened this convention in Paris on June 17th for signature. And 2 years later, by 1996, 50 countries had ratified and the convention came into force. Now, June 17th, as you would know, is now celebrated as World Drought and Desertification Day. That is because the convention was opened for signature on that date, June 17th. Now, so we know where it came from, this international legal instrument. But what does it involve, right? It's a process. A process don't just involve a document. It involves people, mechanisms, and so on and so on. So the UNCCD basically is this international agreement, and it sets out certain institutions within that agreement. The first among these institutions is something called the COP, the Conference of the Parties. This is where everybody meet, meaning the 197 parties to the convention. They all meet and they discuss everything. One thing you have to remember is that they have the ultimate power. In other words, they can decide on every single thing, from finance to even change in the convention, right? It is the Conference of the Parties. Now they meet every 2 years, right? It's a meeting. It usually lasts for 2 weeks. So what happens when they're not meeting? Well, when they're not meeting, another body runs the show. And that body is called the COP Bureau. And the COP Bureau is made up of 10 people who represent the 5 annexes of the convention, meaning there are 2 from Africa, 2 from Asia, 2 from Latin America and the Caribbean, 2 from the non-Mediterranean, and 2 from Central and Eastern Europe. And they are called the Bureau. Now, that is the Bureau that runs the business when the COP is not in session. Now, but apart from the COP, you need other things. You need to understand what is happening with the process of implementation. And so the COP has established 2 subsidiary bodies. One is called the CST, which is the Committee on Science and Technology, and the other is called the CRIC. The CST was established under the convention itself. So you can find it in Article 24 of the convention. And its name tells you what it does. It advises the COP on matters of science and technology. Land is a question of science as well. It's a question of what technology you use, and this is why this committee is so important. But then there's something called the CRIC, which is the Committee for the Review of the Implementation of the Convention. And the CRIC, of course, that's what it does. Because we want to know whether we are succeeding in implementing this convention, whether we are tackling the questions of land properly, yes or no, or are we going backwards? And to know that, you have to be able to do what? Two things: monitor and evaluate. And this is what the CRIC does. It monitors the implementation, it evaluates what is happening, and so new decisions can be made. Outside of those bodies, of course, this process has got to be run day in, day out. And so you have administrative bodies. And the two most important, or the two standing ones, are the Secretariat, which is where I work and from where I'm speaking to you, and the Global Mechanism. The Secretariat is basically the custodian of the entire process. The Global Mechanism is the operational arm, and they go out to countries, they work with countries in doing very, very concrete things as regards implementation. So this is basically the central structure, if you want, of the UNCCD process. Now, as you can understand, this process has evolved over the years. Remember, I told you it began in 1992. We are now the year 2000. That's a long time. So what has happened over that time? Well, in the first place, as you know, we had only a convention. But that convention in legal terms only contained what is called blanket norms, general norms. Say, oh, we're going to implement a convention and so on and so on. But it did not have any way of measuring that. Okay, how far have we gone? How much have we done? And so within 10 years, people realized, no, we have to do something better. And so they came up with what was called the 10-year strategy. In that 10-year strategy, you had operational objectives and strategic objectives. But outside of that, you had concrete targets and you had indicators. So in other words, that strategy, which ran from 2008 to 2018, was a strategy to allow us to measure what was happening. And so we worked with that. But we're now what? We're now in 2000. So we have moved on from that strategy. And now we have a new strategic framework, which runs from 2018 to 2030. And guess what? That ties the UNCCD right into the Sustainable Development Program. As you would know, in 2015, the United Nations adopted what is called Agenda 2030. It has 17 Sustainable Development Goals. One of them is goal number 15, which deals with land. And UNCCD has a responsibility as regards that particular objective. And so therefore, we are now closely really tied into the whole sustainable development process. What is important to understand is this, that the UNCCD now, as it exists, has evolved from just a convention which dealt broadly, in very broad terms, with the issue of desertification. Now there are indicators, there are different processes, mechanisms which allow us to actually measure what is happening. But outside of that, land has now been brought into the center of the entire sustainable development process. So here you have the evolution of the UNCCD. Finally, at the end of this module, you would have a quiz. Please make sure you read the fundamental material plus the additional material that we have suggested, because if you don't know this material, it would be rather difficult for you to take the quiz. The quiz is not to test how bright you are or anything of that sort. It's just to ensure that the knowledge that we're trying to share is solidly in your head, in your mind. Additionally, remember that we are available to assist you, to help you. You just have to contact us and we will be ready to assist you in whatever way we can. I wish you every success, and until next time, this is Richard Byron Cox. Thank you.